Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first Back to Basics workshop for the year 2022. We're so excited that you've joined us as we discuss the NewsFlash around climate disasters, specifically in global south countries or places that happen to be in the global south, like Africa. And we may mention other places such as India that have been affected by natural disasters in recent times. My name is Michelle, and I will be one of the hosts together with Xoli. We run these Back to Basics workshops on a monthly basis because we realize that a lot of the times when people are in the climate space, or if people come across this concept of climate change, it's often very difficult for somebody to understand what's being spoken about. And so we run these monthly workshops, and February's workshop is around climate disasters or natural disasters, rather. I see there's a question in the chat, and Jolene says she's here to learn, so yay. Climate change is thrown around so much. What is the real definition? And this is such a good question. But I think just before I move on to answering it, can I ask that everybody puts their pronouns in the chat? Just so we don't misgender anybody. So what climate change is, I think in very simple terms, is it is the change in weather patterns over an extended period. So over millions of years, hundreds of years, decades, and why this has become such a problem is in recent years, since round about the mid 20th century, we've seen that our climate, so the global climate, started to respond to all of the activities that we were doing at the time. So things like industrialization and the like. And the more we started using fuel-based cars, the more we started constructing more buildings and all of these things that were releasing gases into the atmosphere, which would then disturb the natural flow of things. So in short, what we did as people is we accelerated the rate at which our climate changes naturally. And so that is why now climate change is seen to be a problem. When we look at climate change as climate change, it's not a bad thing because the climate changes over millions of years, hundreds of years even. But why it's become a problem in recent times is because it started changing at a rapid pace, or faster than it was, or faster than it would have had we not started with all of these coal projects, with all of these fuel-based vehicles, with all of this construction that is disrupting the natural flow of things like deforestation and really just destabilizing what naturally the earth would be able to do for us, and so on and so forth.
So while Michelle is sharing his screen, she mentioned actually a word, which I think it's a big word, which is acceleration. And she said, like, we accelerated, the climate change. And one of our missions in this space is to really deconstruct these big terminology that are often thrown in this space, and you can see often if you go into the spaces, climate change spaces, there are certain words that have been used, which sometimes often leave a lot of people behind because there could be an assumption that we all know what the word accelerate means, but it's not always the case, especially if you start engaging young people from marginalized communities. So if you had no idea what the word accelerate, it just means to move quickly, to move forward quickly. Yeah.
Thank you, Xoli. So I hope that we now are all moving together at the same pace. Please don't also be shy to say, hey, I don't understand that word that you've just used. Please explain it. That is one of the reasons why we do what we do, because we want to make sure that as many people understand as many of these things as possible. So why and where have these natural disasters been happening? The short answer to where is all over the world. The longer answer, which is the one that we're going to be using today, is one that we've streamlined, and we've looked at specific areas that have been affected by natural disasters. And those specific areas include parts of the global north, such as India, and parts of Africa as well, the global south, parts of the global south, such as India, as well as countries in Africa. One example is very recently, not more than a month and a half ago, Mauritius was hit by 2 tropical cyclones in a space of about a week. What that caused is so many people were displaced. So then we are going to be discussing a lot of those things. I was just about to get into it. So these are some of the places where these natural disasters are occurring. South Africa is one of them, where we've seen drought, extreme drought. We've seen thunderstorms. We've seen flooding. We've seen, in any climate or natural disaster, people are bound to be displaced, right? So these are all of the things that we're seeing. Mozambique is one. And we know that in recent years as well, Mozambique has been victim to a lot of tropical cyclones, such as the most commonly known being Cyclone Idai. Then we go to another natural disaster that occurred. It occurred in the DRC, and that's where a volcano erupted, and down to like where South Africa is, we felt the effects of that eruption. So these are just the places where these natural disasters have been happening. And this is most definitely only in recent times. So between around mid last year, so June, July 2021 to February 2022. And why they're happening is, again, getting back to like the definition of climate change that I'd given in the beginning. We say that climate change is supposed to be a naturally occurring thing. It means that the climate is supposed to change after a certain amount of time has passed. What's happened is we have sped up the process, which means that with the speeding up of things like natural disasters are becoming a lot more recent, but together with things like global warming, the effects of natural disasters or climate change are faced or experienced in a much more horrifying way, in that because we've got rising sea levels, where we would have a natural cyclone, it would be a much more powerful cyclone that, you know, goes through like a place or an area. Oli?
Thank you, Michelle. I just also like want to take us like one step back, and just to say like the reason why we call this space back to basic, because we really want to take things back to the foundation, you know, because often, as Michelle said, that there are a lot of people that get left behind just because of the assumption that we understand these terminologies, we understand these descriptions or what these big words mean. But often when we start to engage, you know, with grassroots movements or those people that are currently feeling the effects of climate change, they often left behind and don't really have access to resources and knowledge, and therefore cannot engage, you know, in these conversations. So please feel free to stop us if we are moving too fast, but also feel free to speak in your language, because also for us, like, access and representation is key. We want people to really feel free that they can express themselves in a language that they feel comfortable in. Of course, we within avail translation if it's a language that we don't know, but we don't want anybody to feel like they can't engage because English is not their first language and they're not good at it. So we welcome everybody to speak in a language that feels comfortable to them. So Michelle spoke about acceleration, of how the change in the climate is happening super fast. So, natural disasters, they've always existed. I remember my grandmother actually telling me stories of how back in the villages where they would plant corn. And during harvest time, there will be some corn, that was used immediately to feed the families, to feed the livestock, but they kept 50% of it in a barrel just for the season of drought, because they knew that there will be a time where they cannot yield the same harvest because of just the change in climate. Also, like remembering how she used to tell us that sometimes they would have to take some of their livestock to different villages because they knew that somehow, there will be these natural disasters happening. But the difference between then and now is that they kind of like knew when they would happen, but also they were not happening as quick as they're happening now. If you look from the space of 2020 to like now, like every week, there is a country somewhere in Africa that is experiencing some form of a natural disaster. And that is not normal. And if, we're looking at the climate at its whole, we will note that the vulnerable countries, specifically like from Africa and the communities that are already experiencing the effects of climate change and suffering, they are the ones, who are hit the most. And often, when we hear or experience these natural disasters, often like we don't get to see or hear that there are other countries around us that are currently also experiencing the same, natural disasters. And hence we've called this workshop NewsFlash, because we just want to raise awareness that this is not an isolated issue. Like you might be in South Africa in Tembisa, or I might be in Cape Town in Guguletu, or you might be in New York, you might be in Zim, but literally all around the world, there are communities, people who are badly affected by these natural disasters. And also one thing that we don't see on social media and also on news is that when these natural disasters happen, often it's not just the infrastructure that gets damaged, that we get to see. We get to see buildings falling, roads, mudslides, but there's so much, that's integrated with all of that, which we call intersectionality. And we'll get into that word and really explain what it means. So there are things like, the biodiversity of that area, like the animals, the insects, the plant life that gets affected. There's the livelihood, because if for example, there are floods, people can't get to work, people would lose job, which also then affects the economy of that community. I've already spoken about the infrastructure also that gets damaged, but crops, but also the human rights, because in all of our countries, we have constitution that says, that protects our human rights. And it's something that we often don't think of, that, as a South African, I know that I have a right to a clean, healthy environment. But when these natural disasters happen, my rights are being compromised. Because if I'm a woman and perhaps living in an informal settlement and there are floods, I'm losing my home, and that means I'll be displaced. And when I'm displaced, I'll probably be moved to a communal hall for safety. And there, my safety as a woman then becomes compromised. Okay. because there's no privacy. There's also like food, you know, I have a right to food. Food, I'll be compromised because probably I'm used to eating 3 meals a day, and suddenly the place the place that is being organized probably will offer 1 meal a day, you know. I would not be able to get to my job, you know, because probably I've lost everything. And if I am a school-going child, I would not be able to go to school. That means then my rights to education are also being compromised. So there are all of these factors, all of these intersectionalities that often like play part in these natural disasters that we don't often hear about, you know, when we see the floods and the wildfires on social media and also news. So now what we're going to do is we actually going to play a video, and we want you to watch this video, but just be mindful of what's coming up for you while you're watching this. And then we really gonna create a space where we're gonna engage, because again, like we don't want this space to be just a preaching where it's just me and Michelle and speaking. Like, we want to hear from you, because we also know that you are coming here with great knowledge and wisdom, and also just the lived experience of like having experienced some of these natural disasters in your own community or city. Yeah. And after that, we'll then put you into breakout rooms where we will give you questions to reflect, and then we'll come together and take it from there. Yeah. I also see Michelle has put on the chat some definitions of what intersectionality means. Yeah. Oh, also one thing we forgot to mention is that we have a terminology document that we have created in 3 languages, in English, Xhosa, and Afrikaans. And we will definitely share the links just before the end of this workshop, and something that you could use as a reference, but also share in your community, because we really want this to be accessible to everybody. Yeah.
South Africa, Tembisa, Gauteng on February 18, 2022. Heavy rains and flash floods in Ivory Park, Tembisa caused 1 death, 187 homeless, and 3 people missing. Tembisa, formerly Tembisa, is a township situated north of Kempton Park on the East Rand, Gauteng, South Africa. It was established in 1957 when black people were resettled from Alexandra and other areas in Edenvale, Kempton Park, Midrand, and Germiston. Last night, heavy rain led to 4 people going missing, and one of them was recovered just this morning. The city would like to offer its condolences to the family. They confirmed that they knew who the deceased was. Recently, Joburg Mayor Mpho Felatsi, together with MMC for Public Safety, disaster management officials and city provincial disaster management teams visited the area to assess the damage.
God have mercy, please save the families.
The search and rescue teams are continuing the search for the remaining 3 people. A total of 187 people were left homeless following the flood disaster. By Saturday evening they will be housed in temporary shelters. The Municipal Housing Department of Polokwane City also provided assistance. A team had been on the ground at the affected area, making sure it wasn't flooded and that residents were being relocated to a safe space. The Johannesburg municipality wants to build a permanent housing project for people living without formal accommodation. These houses should contain basic amenities such as sanitation, water, and electricity. The city officials are working hard to assist the victims of the floods.
Thank you, Michelle. So now we actually gonna put you in breakout rooms in groups of, I think, 2. And there are questions that we would like you to discuss in your groups. And then we're gonna come together and debrief. Yeah.
Sure. I think just before we all go into breakout rooms and we discuss what we're going to be doing, I do want to say that if this video made you feel a certain way, it's okay to feel that way. I know feelings of hopelessness also can come out of seeing something like this. So we do realize that, and we want you to know that it is okay to feel like that. And that when we do go into the breakout rooms, if we can honestly share, and then, yeah, that's just something that I'd wanted to say from my side.
Thank you, Michelle. Definitely. Yeah, this is also a space to bring your whole self and being authentic, that sometimes watching or experiencing these events could really bring some really strong feelings. And yeah, as Michelle said, that those feelings are welcome. Probably now you received an invitation to join a breakout room, please join. And we will broadcast the message, the questions to all the groups. Welcome back, everyone. Yeah, so it would be interesting to hear, yeah, just your thoughts and yeah, the discussions that took place in those breakout rooms. So I guess the first question is like, what went through your mind, when you saw that video? Please feel free to unmute yourself, but also use the chat, because we know sometimes people don't feel comfortable speaking in the spaces. So yeah. And as we said before, please feel welcome to share in your language. Yeah. Yeah, please go ahead, Eunice.
Yeah. Watching the video, I just felt something just running through my body. Like I just shivered. I couldn't just believe it that this is happening to us in this era where sometimes you get to hear of natural disasters, but this time, if the thing is close to you, you feel the need and then the urgency that something must be done. Like I really feel bad.
Thank you, Eunice. Yeah, it's incredible how the body is the first response, because we are embodied human beings and we have feelings, often that is the first thing to respond. Sometimes it's like the heart, beating fast, or the breath. Yeah, so it's always great to have that awareness of how your body reacts when we watching these scenes. And also, yeah, the agency, yeah, which we will get into, as later on. What else? Thank you, Eunice. Thank you so much. What else? Samuel said, I feel sad watching the video, but I'm also grateful that there are people who care about these issues. Thank you for hosting this space. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for making the time to be here. And I guess another question was like, what else? Because often the media portrays a certain image, and often there's so much, like I said before, that gets left behind that we don't get to see. So maybe just based on what you saw, what do you think we were not seeing, from that video?
Tawanda, you can go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much, guys. Thank you for having me here. I think the first thing that got to me, when natural disasters occur, usually there's nothing that we can do about it. But when you see it happening and you do not have control over it, it gives you that edge, it gives you those goosebumps to want to do more in terms of preparedness, and it brings why we are here today, right now, talking about these things, enlightening each other on how to maneuver, how to move when it comes to climate change. It's really sad because the aftermath of a situation like in that video, no one will tell you about it. The documentary is about when the floods happened, but no one is talking about the number of people who were displaced, the number of people that died that day, and the number of possessions people lost on that day. We do not know about that, so we will not understand. But to us, we need to work more hard on making sure that the preparedness of it through giving each other knowledge and sharing these moments, because someone cannot feel obliged to work towards climate change if they haven't seen this video. You get what I mean? So I think this is the chance and this is the time for us to go back where we went back with that video and have that emotion so that it motivates us to do more. I think that's all that I got from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tawanda. Yeah, I mean, the agency, but also the motivation to really keep going and continue, creating these spaces, spreading awareness, and holding the government accountable actually to do something. Yeah, but also like often, as I said, like the media likes to paint a certain image, and often like there's so much that get left behind. And I saw that Eunice wrote on the chat that, I mean, the effects on women and children, were not captured on that video, and I'm sure there's so much, that we couldn't see that happen. Also like the aftermath, of just people being displaced, the infrastructure that was damaged, there's just so much around like loss and damage, that often we don't get to see, on these media platforms. Yeah. Michelle, do you have more questions?
No, not any more questions. It was just more on, again, like just reiterating or repeating that this is a heavy conversation, and it is okay if you feel heaviness in your heart, if you feel grief, that is very, very valid. Even if it's for people you don't know, even if it's for people you've never seen before, it's very, very valid to feel grief toward everything that's happened, them losing their livelihoods, them losing everything that makes them who they are. You saw all of those structures that were washed away, right? So it's very much okay for you to be feeling the way that you're feeling, if it's the same way that I'm feeling. And yeah, maybe just thinking around, like, how long do we think the town will take to recover? But also another maybe extension of the question would be, do you think that this town will be rebuilt? Do you think it's possible just for what we've seen on the video?
Yeah, so Mel on the chat says the severity of the aftermath. Let me just pop that up again. Yeah, so the severity of the aftermath of this disaster was definitely not captured. We know that nearly 200 people are left homeless, but what is happening to alleviate this immense stress? The effects on women and children. Yeah, definitely. So we have made a list of the recent natural disasters that some are currently happening, but have happened around Africa. So again, as we are reading this list, please just be mindful of your own emotional state, of what comes up. Yeah, because as Michelle said, this is a very heavy topic, because I mean, all of this is centered around human beings, So we're going to start with Madagascar. So in Madagascar, there were cyclones, Cyclone Basteria, where there were 121 people that died from that. In DRC Congo, we saw there were floods, which left thousands of people displaced. In Uganda, also floods in the western region, which left 9 people dead. In Mozambique, the tropical storm, which left, they're still counting the number of people that were deceased from that tropical storm. In Zambia, floods that affected thousands of people. Currently, to date, there were 15,000 people affected and being displaced from the floods. In Congo, Brazzaville, also floods, 15 dead, 9 missing, still have not found till this day. In South Sudan, there's been over 800,000 people affected by floods. And in Kenya, there's been 32 people that died in the recent floods. And in South Africa, in KZN, and in the Eastern Cape, currently there are more than 20 people that died due to floods and 3 missing. Again, this is the stats, that we get from social media, and I'm sure there are a lot of bodies that are uncounted, because again, the media will tell us what they want us to hear or see. And I'm sure there are a lot of bodies that died during those floods or cyclones or storms that we don't even know, the volcano eruptions in the DRC, which we'll get to hear about on Wednesday when we have our dialogue. The floods in Indonesia, the bushfires in Australia, the tremor, that was in Centurion in Joburg. Again, the cyclones in Malawi, the floods in the Eastern Cape, the drought, the continuous drought in Kenya, in Ethiopia, in Zambia, in Malawi. Yeah. And also one thing that's very fascinating about natural disasters, hey? So as I said in my introduction, is that these things used to happen, back in the days, but not in the rapid form that they're currently now happening. And one thing to always, that we always need to be aware of is that some of these natural disasters, they're really alleviated or by, the poor planning, of our governments, the management of resources, the limited investment, in the infrastructure, but also like the reoccurrence, of these natural disasters, especially if you look at Madagascar. Madagascar, like literally every week, there is something. There's cyclones, there's storms, there's floods, there's drought. And also another thing, which for me was very fascinating, especially like looking at the Eastern Cape, because that's where my grandmother come from. And whenever I go home, it's just a sad situation of just like really experiencing how the whole ecosystem is changing, due to continuous ongoing drought. And I was recently chatting to a scientist friend, and he said something which was very interesting. And he's like, if you look at the landscape of the Eastern Cape, and also the meteorology, which I will write the definition because that's a very big word, it's very complex, because the region of the Eastern Cape, the west part of it, is near the transition zone between the summer and the winter rainfall. You know, so the town itself like experiences both the winter and the summer rain, but because now of the changes in our climate, the region is not getting enough water, but you will also, I know currently like the dams have been filling up because they've had so much rain, you know, in the northern parts of the Eastern Cape, but we still have the eastern parts like the PE where the dams are still empty, but this is still under one region. So there's also like all of those complexities, you know, that has to do with all of these natural disasters. But one thing that we want to brainstorm now as a group is like, how do we move forward? You know, now that we know about this, you know, what do you think needs to shift or change? And this is now from the grassroots. You know, we are not talking from high level, you know, policy level government, because that's just a conversation of another day, which probably we will have, you know, we'll create space for. But I'm just thinking like, just imagining like that mama, you know, from a township who lives in that informal settlement, who has no clue about even what climate change is. How can we start engaging with them, you know, and preparing them to really build resilience, or just being aware, you know, that there are these things happening and they're going to continue happening as our climate, you know, continues to change. Yeah. So also please feel free to use the chat or to unmute yourself. Eunice?
Yeah, I think there should be more education, because what I realize is that people don't even really know, especially if you see people dumping rubbish anyhow. They don't even know, they don't even understand what they are doing. So I think there should be more education, especially go to the grassroots. Educate people about the consequences of certain action they take. Because if you keep on dumping and then there is rain expected that is going to come back to you. So I think there should be more education. People to understand what really climate change is, what is happening, the effect, the long term, the short term. I think that way is a way of trying to help people individually in their own small way. They can be able to start checking certain things they do. That's what I think can be done.
Thank you, Eunice. I mean, definitely. And I mean, that's why we, you know, as African Climate Alliance, we've created this space because we also value the power of education, and we know how that could really leave a lot of people behind, you know. So yeah, thank you. Anyone else? I think also, I mean, another interesting thing or thing that I'm very fascinated about is that framing these concepts, you know, because yes, we speak about education, that we do, it's important that we go to these communities and educate them about these issues, but how do we frame them to somebody whose language maybe some don't even have some of these words, you know? If I'm thinking of like Xhosa or Tswana, I know like there's some words that just don't exist, you know, in these languages. And so how do we then begin to frame, you know, this concept in to being accessible and relatable, you know, to those people who are already, you know, experiencing the effects of climate change? And I would also just really like to hear from other countries of, you know, if you have ideas, if maybe you are already running educational programs or, yeah.
Hello, guys. I think there's another issue that we need to touch on when it comes to, like Eunice was talking about, issue of climate education, there's a way to it. I'll give you an example of some of the work that we are doing here in Zimbabwe. We have went in schools, we've talked to government officials to have climate change as a subject on its own, in our national syllabus, and we are working very hard towards that issue. Now, they've managed to change the syllabus for agriculture and include climate change as a subject. That professionals actually deduce the information for people in their early grades to understand what basically climate change is, what is a global warming, what do we talk about? We are talking about emissions. How do they affect our climate? How do they affect someone? To say someone is these guys are dying of hunger, but someone was polluting in China. How do you explain that to an 8-year-old? They have to understand that. So it's up to us to make sure that we push society to make these big decisions towards climate change, because the time to act is now. The time to act is now. If we miss this chance, we will lose another generation and many generations, millions of people through climate change effect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tawanda. Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing you saying like to look at gaps, existing gaps, or maybe where there is access to education already, and then maybe shifting, and because schools, I mean, kids go to school to learn, and why not, have specific syllabus geared towards climate change, because I mean, I know in South Africa, a lot of kids, they spend most of the time in school. So why not use that space as a space where they are educated about these matters, and also maybe start them where they're young, instead of us waiting until they are elders and then it's too late. But Eunice also brought in another perspective of using drama, using pictures, animation, drawing programs, as a form of education on climate change, so that by watching these, we can help get some kind of understanding. Definitely. Yeah. So it's all about being appropriate to different age groups. I mean, drama has been used. I mean, I remember when I was in school, there will be nurses coming in to teach us about sexuality, and they would use drama, and it's something that glued us in and made us interested in wanting to watch. But then we learned, I think they call that like edutainment, and it's something that we could use, and pictures and drawings, yeah, but also maybe relating to real experiences, of these people, and maybe that's the first point of just making these societies or communities to look at their lives, and then again going to that big word of intersectionality. So if you don't have access to water, like why, yes, it's a resource thing, but maybe why there's drought, and so we can start then to really engage them, and make and open up different words. Yeah. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Michelle. So I love Michelle. Whenever I'm like, I'm going to hand over to you, Michelle, and she always gives me this big smile. But before I hand over to Michelle, can you share the terminology document? Is that accessible to you? Because it's something that for us, it's very important.
Let me see if I can share it now. And if I'm unable to do that, then we will send it as a follow-up, possibly via email. Yeah, that might be the best way. Then everybody has access to it.
Yeah. And I mean, this is also like an invitation, because I mean, we are based in South Africa, but we work across Africa. So please, I mean, this is an opportunity where we could really just cross bridges and work together, because it feels like we are all very passionate about finding solutions and really pushing education in the climate space. So if you want to translate, some of these terminology documents, please feel free and share them back with us. Yeah. And I think the more we can make them accessible to local languages, the more we can really spread this work. Yeah. Michelle? Mishi?
Thank you. I was still wrestling with the terminology document. So I'm just going to share it. These are obviously things that have come up in conversation. What we are going to be doing is we're going to be adding more to documents such as these. So we're inviting you as well to submit your definitions if you would like for it to be a part of. Okay, there we go. This is the one. This is the one. I'll just make it a bit bigger. So these are just some of the terminologies that we thought about, especially related or relating to the conversation that we were having today. And because the focus was natural disasters, we wanted to just touch a little bit on what a natural disaster was, what a drought was, what displacement meant. You saw that I was typing in the chat as well and being like, this is what displacement means, because we really do believe that at the core of climate action or at the core of any change making is education, which is something that we reinforce, and everything that we do comes from a place of, are we able to make sure that everybody understands this, and are we able to make sure that it's accessible? So you'll find there are terms like climate refugees and human rights have come up. Climate refugees, not so much, but we've spoken about it, not in the ways in which we use the term. Yeah, so climate refugees result from people being displaced due to natural disasters or climate disasters, in the same way that you would find migrants or refugees moving from one country to another due to economic instability or even war. And then you've got human rights and migration. So what we'll do is we'll share this document with everyone via mail. So thank you so much again for coming to this space today. And we really do appreciate it. I did just want to also mention one thing as we move forward, that climate change worsens the effects of natural disasters. That's probably one of the reasons why we chose to start with a newsflash of natural disasters for this year, because we just really wanted to find a starting point that allowed us to make sure that now when we move to speaking about climate change, we know that there's a link with natural disasters. So the ways that climate change worsens the effects of natural disasters is that disasters become much more frequent. So where you would have maybe experienced a drought once every 7 years, it now becomes twice every 7 years or 3 times every 7 years, which means that now a lot more people are affected, but at a greater scale than before. And this is why climate change is becoming an issue for us specifically living through this period of time. But it's also even more important to realize that a lot of the times when these conversations are being had, a lot of the times it centers the environment only and not always people who are affected. In these cases, a lot of the times the most affected people are specifically people of color and people who are coming from developing countries. So it's very important to center people each time we have conversations with these specific conversations, because people are losing their identity, they're losing their livelihoods, they're losing their belongings, family members, and all of that stuff. And so I invite everybody to do the following thing as we move on from today, to center people in the ways that when we engage around issues of climate and climate change and disasters, to center people and just really be aware of the fact that people are being forced to live all they know and being forced to start afresh. And a lot of these people may never even gain their sense of self, or they may never regain their sense of self as it's linked to everything that they've lost. So that is one thing that I wanted to invite everybody to sort of think about. And again, just to like experience everything that you're experiencing today, and maybe even reflect, maybe not today, because it tends to be quite overwhelming. Just think about why this made you feel this way, what you would like to do to make sure that this changes. If it is in your power, are you going to join a local organizing group? Or are you going to use the social media as a tool for activism? You know, it's just things that you can do that still will be very, very meaningful in the long run, even though in the sight of the video we watched, it looks like, you know, it might not mean or matter much. So I just invite you to feel everything that you were feeling, but also moving forward, just realize that it's very important to center people in conversations like these when we do have them.
Right, Michelle. And speaking about centering human beings, so on Wednesday, we will have a dialogue where we're going to invite guest speakers from, we are very excited. We have 2 panelists from DRC and 1 from South Africa who will be sharing from firsthand, you know, how natural disasters have affected them, you know, as individuals, but also their families and communities. And please join us, because all of what we have discussed today would really just make sense, you know, when you join the dialogue. And yeah, it's just, as Michelle said, that also a space to be inspired, because often, like, when we come into the spaces, there's a sense of hopelessness, and we really want to inspire you to take little steps, you know, and it's not maybe to think big, to think about, you know, your own cycles, like your social media. What are you putting out in your social media? How are you engaging with your local community, even with your family? And if you do want to be part of a big family, ACA does have a youth space, and we have a WhatsApp group and a Facebook page where you can engage with like-minded young people. And every second month, we have these dialogue, these spaces where we can really deconstruct this big terminology and words, so that when you then get invited, you know, into conferences or webinars, then you can engage in a way that's meaningful, because you know what these terms or concepts, what they mean. Yeah. And I know that we are a bit over the time, so big apologies for that. Thank you so much. And maybe for our checkout, maybe if we could just hear everybody, just one word, or maybe one thing you are taking from this conversation from today. Thank you, Shaolin. Very informative, thought-provoking. Hope to join more workshops soon. Keep up the good work. Yay, awesome. Learning, Captain. Please also feel free to unmute yourself, but always welcome to use the chat. Just one word or one thing that you are taking from today's workshop. Inspired, happy. Yes, definitely we will share the recordings. I think we also have a YouTube channel where all the past recordings are, and yeah, definitely we will share the recordings